So,
I mean, they're even drilling out.
and then we started doing farm market chemistry.
Okay.
Okay, cold and sharp. It's gonna be bad, but for me, it's good. My wife is playing.
No, I did not.
Yeah, no, it's
Okay.
the seam cut off.
All right.
I mean, if they have previously, they use them, but like,
I'm sorry, there's probably one on the other side.
I haven't had anybody.
A different seat.
it's gonna do the same thing.
I believe it's in it.
It's like the China thing. I mean, I've been to Hong Kong. I worked in the container port. And I was pretty high up and doing that. I'd have to go out there.
No, I remember looking for it and I thought,
Yes.
so busy, it's on there.
So I'd have to go out there and talk about the labor. Man, you can bet you made August. I mean, I was on
I might want to advise.
30th, 36th floor, and you could just see the layers. And you're just like, man, that was so sure. I did it.
I've got 4 minutes.
So, I mean, thinking that.
Yes.
The comment card online. Yeah.
I would keep track of it if you would like. Time. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, that's
How are you
true
today, Don?
expression.
And he can't do everything.
Did you get a comment card on what?
Yeah, he's got it.
You drew the short straw today?
Yes.
I have not.
He had a conflict to come up, so I agreed to cover for her.
But you do inform, so you know, if you're on the email already, you can, and I'll just reach out to the people that are, see if there was reason where maybe they didn't receive it, or maybe we, you know.
I'm afraid that some of our emails are going to junk folder because we're sending these large groups.
It's a distinct
And
possibility.
that tends to, did anybody have that problem where the emails ended up in your spam folders?
I did not actually,
I didn't.
which is a rarity.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
happens sometimes.
All right. Well, that's,
If we-
that's
you know, we'll
good.
reach out to those people who may not have been here to just see.
I'm so glad to see you, sir.
Saw him Saturday.
He's not fall over, you gotta take
He
it.
said, "I'll see you next Tuesday." Either that or he might not come get in. Although there's a sign on the door.
Would y'all have?
Can you see if they try to call you?
Yeah. I got my phone right here.
Tyndall had told Chris that he would see him today,
Yeah, I saw him Saturday and he said, "I'll see you Tuesday."
so wondering if he can. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, no.
Uh-huh.
Speak of the devil.
Told no lies.
Now, we had 100%,
1 minute early.
perfect attendance.
You might be missing one.
Okay.
But that's pretty good, I'd say.
Well, I tell you what, I'm pleased.
Good evening.
Good evening, welcome.
Yeah, there's 100.
Jeff, you have an extra packet?
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you. Is that the only? Pardon?
Couple extras,
But I don't know, it looks like maybe they may have gotten picked up by someone else.
Thought we only had 11.
What's that?
Do we only have 11?
There's 11 members on the committee, but we printed out, I think, about 15 copies of the packet, so a couple of them might have gotten double stacked.
I still haven't read it.
Mr. Clark, do you know if Mr. Bernstein is going to be joining us tonight?
I think Donna Frazier is here
Frazier?
for the
Okay.
parish attorney's office.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I see it as the appointed hour. I also see it appears that Mr. Fleury has taken his gavel home with him now that they are on homebound Zoom. So with that, I will just wrap us in with a knuckle on the table and call this meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Absolutely. Michael Billings, Billy Bryce,
Here.
Jim Graves,
Here.
Ray Holman,
Here.
Chris Crackman,
Present.
Don Rosinski,
Here.
Lloyd Thomas,
Here.
Ray Tyndall,
Here.
Jessica Tullis,
Here.
Marty Woolridge,
Here.
and Paul Young.
Here.
All right, you have 10 of 11 members present, and that does constitute a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. Mr. Crackman has volunteered to invite us to join him in prayer. So I see the one hat in the room has been removed. Mr. Crackman, if you would invite us to prayer, please.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we would like to come to you humbly and thank you for all of us being here safely and being able to meet for the good of the rural constituents of Caddo Parish. And we'd like you to show your grace to those overseas that are going through so much turmoil right now, and be with us in our travels on our way home and our works here, and that they are in your grace. In his name I pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing. I note that our agenda reflects the current flag protocol that military veterans or members are allowed to render a hand salute as opposed to a heart salute. Chief Rosinski will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please face the flag.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, everyone, please be seated. And I would invite anyone while they're speaking to unmask, particularly while we're in our own little private cubicles, or remain masked as you might wish to. I asked to start off with some chairman's remarks. I have found in similar roles that I've had in the past that it is useful to establish what we call in the military some rules of engagement on how we're going to do things, and particularly considering the gravity of our charge, that we have some rules that reflect the values that we want to uphold. And in doing that, I would stress two things. First, as far as values is concerned, I've used an acronym in previous leadership roles that I found that people find pretty easy to remember, and it sort of sets the tone. And that acronym is RISES, as in Caddo rises, or whatever the organization is rises. That's what we're looking for. And we begin with the end in mind, and the last letter of that, which will be first, foremost, and always, is safety. That we want to do everything to assure the safety of ourselves, assure the safety of the public we serve, and assure safety and security in the decisions that we make. The R stands for respect, and that is that we will respect each other. We will particularly respect the citizens that come before us to share their opinion, and whether we're televised or not, And Mr. Clerk, are we just televised in this room, or are we actually going out?
We're recording this, and we'll be able to upload it to YouTube, but we are not live streaming it right now, so it will be recorded, and a copy of that is available for anybody who may request a copy.
All right. Well, whether the world is watching or not, that we will be the exemplar for government and our community, our state, and our nation of respecting and reflecting that we are here to serve the citizens, not the other way around. The I is for integrity. Our yes should mean yes, and our no mean no. If there are binding authorities that compel us to do something or prohibit us from doing something, that we be completely honest and transparent with the citizens on the practices that we follow. The S is for service, and that is, as I said, to remember that we are here to serve the people, not to rule the people, and that should be an example for all in American government. In the institution I occupied an office in before retiring and coming back to my ancestral home. We reminded everyone that the highest office in the United States Air Force was citizen, not general or colonel or sergeant, and that we were here to serve the citizens, and I hope we'll reflect that in everything we do. The E is for excellence. That should be our goal. Perfection is impossible, but if we pursue excellence, we'll be serving well. And finally, back to where we started with safety and security, that should be preeminent for all of us. I would ask that we follow the rules of order that are traditional in the Anglo-American system, and that is that people speak one at a time, that we ask to be recognized by the chair, that the chair be neutral in offering recognition and giving people the opportunity to be heard, that when we have people coming before us, that we not pepper them with questions like we're cross-examining a chicken thief, but rather we be recognized by the chair and ask our questions one at a time. And further, that we address each other by title and last name, offering dignity to each individual, and address, no matter how heated or passionate the discussion might be, that we address our comments to the chair, not directly across to each other. All right, with that, the next item on the agenda is to see if we have any agenda additions. Does anybody want to add anything to the agenda tonight? Okay, hearing nothing, I look forward to the next item, which is our first opportunity to welcome one of our citizens. And note that we are here for you, to make sure that your voice is heard and that your interests are represented by this body and the bodies that we report to. And so with that, I'll look at the comment card. I have a comment card from Jake Brown. Mr. Brown, typically 3 minutes is allotted for comments. I note with the long line, the big stack here of comment cards, if you happen to go a couple seconds over, I think we can forgive it.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Brown, please. And I would ask Mr. Brown and anyone addressing this that you identify not only where you live, but since many addresses out in the unincorporated areas of the parish reflect one of the incorporated areas. In my case, I have a Shreveport mailing address, but I live out in the parish. Other people will have Keithville or Blanchard or Vivian or something like that. If you would let us know if you are a resident of one of the unincorporated areas or if you have interests in the unincorporated areas.
Yes, sir. My name is Jake Brown. I live at 1243 Pine Island Road, and I live out on the west end of Cross Lake. So I'm not in the city of Shreveport, but I'm in Caddo Parish. Todd Hopkins is my commissioner. But I was on the board for Cattle Alliance for Freedom, and that's kind of why all y'all are here today, is because of what transpired with House Bill 697. And I just want you guys to know that it's very important what y'all are doing for us, because, I mean, the system, as me, as a landowner, it failed us. And it failed us because we weren't properly represented. And some people might question, well, what does that mean? And it was because the Metropolitan Planning Commission, that board was appointed by Caddo commissioners and city council. So they each get to appoint 4 members, and then they appoint 1 member together. And I don't get to vote for city council. I only get to vote for the commissioner. So me being out in the rural area, we're always not the majority on the Metropolitan Planning Commission. We're not even half. Sometimes we have 1 member, sometimes we have no members. And what ended up happening because of that is, you know, the board was controlled by Shreveport. And, you know, appointed boards, I don't really like appointed boards because you can't get them out. You can't unelect an appointed board member. You know, he's going to do his term and then he's going to leave, or they're going to reinstate him, which normally that's the case. But appointed boards, you know, to me, they breed corruption. I mean, you got friends appointing people, you know, that might not have the experience, but they get in that position on the hopes that they can help them do some of the things that some of the commissioners want to do. So I see we have 3 options. And I mean, we could do no planning and zoning, and the Caddo commissioners deal with any of the planning and zoning issues. This is my favorite. You know, this works in Texas and other areas. We have a lot of areas in Caddo Parish that don't have planning and zoning. You know, if you're not incorporated in a city, if you're not in Blanchard or you're not in Oil City, you don't have planning and zoning unless you're in this 5-mile zone. So with House Bill 697, Danny McCormick, he helped us, and he took away that 5-mile zone. He took away that appointed MPC board that, you know, wasn't working in our best interest. So that's why y'all are here today, because we're trying to figure out what are we going to do. And, you know, so number 1, no planning and zoning. The commissioners handle any of the issues that come up. The other one is simple planning and zoning, and the Caddo commissioners facilitate that and enforce it. And, you know, I'm okay with that because at least I get to elect the Caddo commissioners. So if it doesn't work out for me, at least I can go to the ballot box and either run or find someone to run or put someone in there that believes what I believe. The other option, because, you know, appointed boards, they like them. You know, I mean, that's, you know, it's something that, you know, they like to do for these things, for planning and zoning. So I wouldn't want to repeat the same mistakes again and create another appointed board, because it would probably be corrupted. And you have commissioners from the city that are on the Caddo Commission getting to appoint members to this board. So, you know, I mean, you got rural commissioners and you have city commissioners. And some of these city commissioners, they're on planning and zoning, and they might not have any people. You know, they might not have any people that are in the rural area, but they're making decisions. I don't really agree with that. But something else that I came across, that my wife, she's a philosophy major and she did a lot of poli-sci, but what about sortition? And I didn't really know what that was. And she was like, it's a selection by lottery. So if we have to go the appointed board way, you know, I think that might be our best option. And so the definition for that on Google is sortition is the selection of officials as a random sample from a larger pool of candidates. This system intends to ensure that all competent and interested parties have an equal chance of holding public office. Random selection tries to stop appointed boards from being corrupted and should be seen as a chance for citizens to fulfill his civic duty. You know, there's other countries. Athens has done this. Venice, Florence, Switzerland, India have done this form of selection to prevent corruption and fulfill the will of the people. Today, sortition is commonly used to select prospective jurors in common law systems and is sometimes used in forming citizens groups. We could have certain requirements. You know, you could have to have a high school education. You could, you know, you're going to have to live in that area. But, you know, you could have it that they only hold the position for a year. But what I don't want to do is give the Caddo commissioners the power of appointment. So I just think it's an extension of their will and influence, as well as not having to be held accountable. I mean, they appoint these members, and then you're stuck with that guy. So I urge you not to give the power of appointment to the Caddo commissioners and find something better for us and the citizens of the rural Caddo Parish area.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yes,
Does
sir.
anybody have any questions for Mr. Brown before he relinquishes the podium? All right, hearing none, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, next item on the agenda is new business, and first item under new business is an invited guest who I was honored to extend an invitation to, and that is our own commissioner on the Caddo Parish Commission, Commissioner Todd Hopkins. Commissioner Hopkins, I indicated to everyone that you are the author of the resolution that created us. So we wanted to give you the opportunity to share your vision in that creation and charge this group with your instructions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I first of all want to say to each one of you, thank you for serving. You know you don't get paid for doing this, and it takes up your time. But this is one of the most important issues we've had probably in the last 30 years. And so I think it's important that we look at it. I came up with this resolution basically because there was a feeling that when we got ready to start setting things up, the body wouldn't look and be doing the things that those commissioners out in the, those people out in the real I call the real area, the unincorporated area. I know I shouldn't say that, but that's just me. And because we have been underrepresented in the MPC. Not totally anybody's fault, it just has happened. So I came up with a resolution to first of all review the historical issues related to the Caddo planning and zoning. And I can tell you just briefly that in the 50s, the city of Shreveport, we had a little bit of zoning, but not very much. The city of Shreveport at that time was starting to grow. In places like Agers and things like that, that was out in the parish. And they were trying to annex, and what was happening, they were annexing places that had really not had zoning. So they had a lot of problems at that time. So they went to the legislature and made it a Parish Metropolitan Planning Commission, which was Shreveport, and then at that time they set that 3 mile area around Shreveport to do everything north of that 3 mile area. And you have to remember, these lines have changed over the years, but that in the southern end, they're out, and most of my district is out of the MPC. So whatever we do, it's going to be big time affected on how, because it's a change. Because right now, we don't have zoning unless you live in one of the municipalities. And I was mayor of Wall City at one time, and I can tell you the worst job in the world besides school board is being on a zoning board, because you make your friends mad, you make your enemies mad, you make your kin mad. And then what happens, they just say the heck with it, and it ends up with your local body having to do it. And unlike our speaker before, I don't agree with all that, because I think if we left it at a totally Caddo Parish Commission voting on that, you still would have 6 commissioners voting on issues that don't affect them. So that's one of the things that really put a question mark for me. The second thing was to review the impact of action to be taken in regard to planning and zoning in areas not currently being zoned, which is the unincorporated area. All the incorporated municipalities, which there are 11, have their own system. And only Shreveport has the Metropolitan Planning Commission in that 3 mile zone. So we're only looking at most of the people that are not even in the MPC. when you look up north and then very south. Now around Blanchard area and things like that are outside the city, they're affected because of the MPC gets that circle. So it's important for us to look at that, what could be done, what has happened, what are the other areas doing, and that's what I think is really important. We need to maybe look at Lafayette, Calcasieu, Smith County, places in our region, but kind of away, and see what they're doing, because what Shreveport has is an urban situation, and the rest of it is a rural situation, and they're different. We wrote the Great Expectations master plan, and it was a urban plan, and that's where we began to have problems. So we need to look at other types of zoning, what they've done in the past in other areas. Thirdly, review the impact of action to be taken in regard to planning and zoning in areas not currently being zoned. For example, again, north of 173 is outside the planning area. Those people, and I live there, we don't have zoning. You all of a sudden start telling people they got to be zoned and they got to have this and they got to have that. You have a lot of pushback. So whatever we do, we need to keep it simple and do it where it's not intrusive to them. I mean, I think going out and saying these properties are going to be rural agriculture, rural residential, then we're going to have commercial, and then industrial. But just keep it very simple. I think that's kind of my vision of that. Because if we get into all these little, because of one tract's 1/4 of an acre and another tract's an acre, and this tract's 3 acres and this tract's 5 acres, you've got all these different designations, and it keeps people just mixed up. But we need, whatever we do, keep it simple is what I say. Review any other issues deemed necessary. I'm asking y'all to go out and you're on the front lines. You're around the people. Because I can do that. I go sit at the feed store, or I go eat at a restaurant. But there's still a certain part that people are skeptical because I'm an elected official. That's just the way it is. I understand it. They don't always trust us fully. They might trust us, but not all the way. Y'all out there talking and speaking with, whether it's in groups, non-meeting groups, or whether it's having meetings, I think people feel more comfortable talking to a group like this than the commission, believe it or not. So, my vision was for y'all to be kind of on the front lines, looking at what's working out in other areas, what would work for Caddo, and what would the citizens like to see. Because we're only going to get a small fraction tell us what they want to see. It's the other people that don't say anything a lot of times that get hurt in the long run. So I want to make sure we cover everybody. We really talk and get the information. And then finally, bring a written report back to the commission. And I'm just going to tell you right up front, it can be the greatest report in the world, but there's 12 commissioners and it's got to be ratified by 7. So whatever, don't, at the end of this program, if you don't get all the things you thought should be in there approved, don't feel bad. It happens. We had a charter committee back in the 80s when we went from the police jury to the commission. One of the best moves we ever made in this parish. But it took a while. It took a lot of meeting with the citizens, and there was a lot of blowback in places. But I think it served us well. It's not perfect. This won't be perfect either. Like I said, I envision us doing something very, very simple. I don't want to get into making it UDC complicated. And that's where we're at now. We're just really too complicated in our zoning. I'll take any questions. I'm a kind of a simple guy, so I'll answer the best I can.
Ladies and gentlemen, does anyone want to pose a question to Commissioner Hopkins?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have a question.
Yes.
It seems like, I think the commission seems to have the idea of parish-wide zoning. And it seems to be kind of welcomed, if anything. And I'm wondering, and I know you can't speak for, 12 districts, but for your district, what is your biggest concern as far as, let's say, the Wild Wild West would be? Because that's the popular thing, is that in January 1st, 2022, that anybody can do anything. What is your concern for your district?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a couple examples. We've been doing this for years. It works because what happens is neighbors go next door and say, hey, you can't do this. They don't, it's not a problem. They don't get in fights most of the time. But their neighborhoods kind of patrol their own neighborhoods. And if someone's getting out of line with trash, or with all of a sudden they're bringing in 18-wheelers and parking all over the street, anything like that, they go to the people. The thing that worries me is because we've had nothing in those kind of regulations, it's going to be, the thought process is going to be, here's government again trying to stick it to us. So I don't, that concerns me. I'm a big boy. I pull my pants up and I'll take whatever happens. But that concerns me. If it was just me and it was a perfect world, I'd keep us up there and down south in District 11 the same. But I don't have that kind of power, so whatever this body decides, I think the body at this point, it's like what you said, I think they're looking and they favor parish-wide zoning. Now, whether y'all come back with something different, whether you're going to do it in a graduated area, however y'all decide you think would be best for us, then they might be more receptive to something else. But at this time, I think that's where they're at. I think one of the things I did miss is to review whether we put an in-house planning and zoning group together to do everything in-house, or to continue to contract with the MPC. That's something I would like for y'all to look at. We pay the MPC about $280,000 a year right now. It has been said that it would take us $300,000 plus the first year to set up a planning office. But look, I would ask y'all to look at that and see how it could be done if we did other than the MPC, because I myself would prefer if we did it in-house. And as a former employee of the parish, I can tell you not everybody feels that way, and I understand that, because there's a lot of work involved, and you got to have office space, you got to have a central location, and we probably are pretty full in offices and stuff right now in this location. So, but I mean, it's something that needs to be looked at. We really need to look at that and decide, do we just keep contracting for our enforcement, and or do we do our own? And you've got to have a planner. You got to have a certified planner. I think that's the state law. And I could be wrong, but I believe I read that. And then a planner takes staff, and so if you would look at that also. I know there's probably something I've left out, but if there are any other questions.
Anyone else have a question for Commissioner Hopkins?
I do.
And by the way, thank you for raising your hands, because with the speaker here and the sound system, I have no idea where the sound is coming from, but I can see a hand go up. So yes, just tell us.
What does it take to be a certified planner? I thought that I heard X amount of hours with the class.
I'm not sure. I think, yeah, it's like taking a class, you have to take classes and stuff. I'm not sure exactly how you do that.
John Paul Young had spoke in a meeting about, he didn't mind going to the class to be a planner, so I didn't know if you had to have XYZ behind your name, or you could just...
Yeah, I think it's credentials you have to get. Mr. Clark,
I can speak to that a little bit. I think what the comment that Commissioner Young made was regarding being a member of, sitting on the MPC. Members who are a committee member for zoning board is required to do annual training. And so they are required to do, I believe it's, I'm going to say it's not that much, but it's maybe 10 or 20 hours of annual training in zoning laws, so that they are up to date with what those zoning laws are. And I believe that is a state requirement, not a Caddo requirement.
Right. Okay.
So I think that's what he was referring to. In regards to the actual requirements for a planner, I think those do vary from place to place. I know that there are some specific ones, but I think that people can reach that position through different career tracks. But there is a American Planning Association does have some standardized things that they if you're looking for kind of a standard what they expect, that APA, American Planning Association, would have this.
Thank you, Mr. Emerson.
And Mr. Chairman, there was one more thing, and I'm going to sit down. I wanted y'all to be aware, we have already approved the planning board. We have 5 members that will come from the unincorporated area only. That's written in the ordinance. Now, they'll have to be voted on by the 12 commissioners for those 5 positions. But whoever gets on that board, and then maybe some of y'all sitting in this room won't want to serve like that when it's all said and done. Most of you are going to want to run a different direction probably. But we will do that, and I'm really, really open if this board comes back and says we need to put term limits on that. I don't mind making an amendment to that ordinance and doing that. If that's something that this body would feel would be a good idea, I'm open to that. So that's all I have.
No, I have a
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Would you please explain to me what authority the MPC or the planning board would have over neighborhood covenants?
Our legal team might could do that better than I could, because
Could you repeat the question, ma'am? I'm sorry.
Yes, I wanted to know what authority the MPC or the planning board would have over neighborhood covenants.
Actually, I do not think the MPC has authority over covenants, but covenants are governed by your local ordinances and some state constitutional statutes. There are going to be some things that you cannot put in covenants because they are illegal. And so that would be a legal requirement, not necessarily governed by the MPC.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the MPC can make changes in our zoning allowing businesses where our neighborhood restrictions say no businesses are allowed?
Well, the way the MPC works is they recommend the zoning change when people come before them and request zoning changes. But actually, if it's in the unincorporated area of the parish commission has the final vote on whether or not to make the zoning change. If it's inside the city limits, the city council has the final vote on whether or not to make the zoning change. So the MPC will make the recommendation.
Right, but they can disregard the neighborhood's restrictions or covenants?
It's a very tricky area of law, because if the covenant is deemed illegal or something of that nature, that can be disregarded. If the neighborhood has grown in a different way that is not foreseen, There are different case laws or different things that your laws will require that will supersede covenants and some of your local ordinances. And so the real option is, or the real test is for them to try to make decisions that run parallel to what the law requires, because ultimately, if something is appealed from the final zoning decision by the commission or the council, the judge is going to look at what the laws are in place, not necessarily the zoning laws, but whether or not certain types of zoning can be required, whether this lot size conforms with certain types of zoning, whether or not, if you're saying you want to change the zone from residential or something else, is it residential on this side of the street and commercial on the other side of the street? How much of a change is it really? He will take into consideration neighbors' concerns, covenants, assuming that they are legal, but that may not be the ultimate basis for the final decision.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else have a question for Commissioner Hopkins? I do before you sit down. I just want to make sure that I let everybody
I
else go
actually do
first.
again. I do again, and
All
I
right.
apologize.
Okay, Mr. Crackman.
I'm just wondering, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, maybe not, and it might be good for legal. If we're talking about making different zoning areas, but maybe, depending on what we decide, if we're talking about more or less making bands around the city with more stringent zoning as it goes, by the House bill, or what is it, Act 290, whatever it is?
294, I believe.
Act 294? By that, the way I read it is by the city limits all the way to the parish limit, all has to be treated the same indiscriminately. And so I'm wondering if you could make a boundary like that, you know, per se a band or something like that, and then across the street, they have a different set of codes, standards, ordinance. That's blatant discrimination, and I'm not sure if the House bill or the Act will allow us to do that. I think that would take legislation.
Actually, I think part of the issues that you all are going to find that you face is not so much the bans per se. I think you can have discrimination issues the way that you outline it, but I think you can also have discrimination reverse if some people are subject to zoning and some people are not.
Correct.
And so legally, usually some type of zoning, whether it's minimalist or otherwise, is going to probably be required. But as you all go forward with that, and Mr. Bernstein will be here with you, more likely than not, you all will get deeper into those legalities. But some of the things you're going to face are going to have legal requirements that you're going to have to meet with.
Well, I know I'm seeing where there's some people that are worried about the 49 corridor that's up and around Todd's district, and they're worried about undesirable businesses popping up around the 49 corridor. And then you have the 49 zoning plan that was given in a presentation to the Long-Range Planning Committee that just went 2 miles up I-49, and I don't really see how that's legal, no more than I see us making separate areas around Shreveport and indifferent. The way the bill is written, it seems to me like we have to treat it the same, because the House bill or the Act removes the 5-mile radius around Shreveport. It removes it. It took special legislation in 1954 to gain that 5 miles. It was up to 5 miles. It started with 3. And then it was expanded as Shreveport expanded, and that took special legislation from the state legislature. But this act removes that, and so now I think if we wanted to create separate zones for zoning and planning, I don't know what you would call it, I guess bands is the best way to describe it. I think everybody understands that. If we wanted to create different bands for different types of zoning, I'm pretty sure the commission has no legal authority to do that.
And that is where we differ, because Mr. Craigman, what the bill did, basically back in the 1950s, there were no home rule charters in Shreveport or Caddo. So basically what that bill did, they had to go to the legislature to set up zoning. And the area that was chosen was within the city limits of Shreveport and that 5-mile band, which I understand, if recollection serves, changes from or has changed over time. But since the advent of that, and so basically that was how you did planning and zoning. That was the agreement, like Mr. Hopkins asked you to look at whether or not you were going to have in-house staff versus contracting with the MPC. That was basically your zoning agreement. What the act did basically took the parish out of that zoning agreement. It did not take away the parish's ability, which it gained under its home rule charter, to zone. It doesn't take the legislature anymore to grant authority to a home rule charter locality, whether it's a municipality or a parish, to zone. So Caddo Parish has the ability or has the legal authority to zone. The bill didn't take that away. It just basically took the parish out of the 1950 agreement.
Okay, I'm gonna have to reread it, but I think we're gonna differ on that.
Mr. Crackman,
Yes,
if I
sir.
may, and to let Commissioner Hopkins get down from out of the hot seat here.
Please.
Would it be of any use to you if we're looking at Act 294 to invite Representative McCormick, who was the author of Act 294 of 2020, just as Commissioner Hopkins was the author of Resolution 42, to invite him to come address us and enlighten us on what was intended by that and what the outcome of that act is.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I was going to say so at the closing of the meeting, but I had talking to Representative McCormick and his legislative assistant, and I was going to invite them to our next meeting to kind of get a little bit of a better grip on what it was exactly that they were trying to prove by passing this legislation, and see if we can get the author's perspective.
Well, I was going to suggest it may break what appears to be an impasse to me to defer that until we have Representative McCormick come and see us. And I'd invite you to bring that up later on in the meeting before we close.
Yes, sir.
To see if that's the will of the committee to do that. If there are no other questions, I want to get a couple clarifications, Commissioner, if I could. Now, did I hear you say that it would be your desire to keep District 1 the same as it is now?
That would be my desire, yes.
Would you make sure that all of us understand what the current zoning regime is in District 1?
Okay, in District 1, we actually have two areas. When you come out to around Blanchard, all the way to Highway 173, that's in that band, that MPC band. So they're all the way over to the Texas line. Well, really before you get to 169, it stops. That band, those people have to live by the UDC at this time. North of there, we don't have that type of regulations. Everybody, I have 2 or 3 boats, and I have a tractor, but I have a big lot. And in most cases, we don't have any problems. From time to time, someone wants to put or make it appear to be a junkyard, but the neighbors come and take care of that. So yeah, there's actually 2 areas. Then if you go inside the municipalities, Vivian, Oil City, Halston, Blanchard, even Greenwood, they have a zoning board separate that they appoint when they can get people to serve and take care of their own business inside that municipality. So
we pretty much, if I may, we've pretty much limited our scope just to looking at the unincorporated areas
Yes, sir.
of the parish. So I'm curious, in those unincorporated areas outside the 5-mile zone, in your district, the Wild West doesn't sound so wild.
It's not.
okay.
It's really
All
not.
right. Yeah, I was going to say I've lived in the totalitarian East in my lifetime, and I'd rather be in the Wild West any time. I mean, anybody who wants to come with me to the former Soviet Union, it was not the workers' paradise that it was cracked up to be.
And if you ask Commissioner Lazarus, Commissioner Lazarus feels the same way I do, but we're the most rural two districts, really and
Yeah.
truly. He's in the Keithville, Spring Ridge area, and so, it's a little different out there.
All right, and you also mentioned that you wanted us to look at other areas, and you mentioned some parishes and counties nearby. I like to use the genteel word benchmarking.
Right.
College professors might refer to that as plagiarizing, but I think I gladly will plagiarize off of success if there's somebody out there that is doing it right and able to demonstrate success. Are you aware of any particular parishes or counties that we should look at that are particularly successful in this?
I would just suggest this, that I would look at areas that are comparable in population to Caddo, but still a lot of rural, like Smith County. You have Tyler.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot of rural, but you also have Bullard and different places, little municipalities also in there. So that's why, and I go through Smith County quite a bit. And
well, we have a unique challenge in that we democratically, the people who live in the unincorporated areas of the parish, although we occupy the majority of the land area within the parish, we are a democratic minority. That the democratic majority lives in the city of Shreveport and in the other incorporated communities within the parish.
That's correct.
And again, being informed by my experiences living in other countries and other societies in my career, the difference between majority rule and minority rule and mob rule is minority rights. So, we find ourselves as a distinct democratic minority that has somewhat been dominated by the democratic majority that finds it very appropriate to have something like the UDC. And if they do, that's great. But that is a challenge. Are there any communities, you mentioned Smith County, any parishes within the state of Louisiana that reflect our unique demographics?
You could look at maybe Calcasieu Parish. I'm not sure if it really fits completely. You might even look at Ouachita, Monroe area over
Okay.
there. That might be a place to look.
Yeah.
Might be, even though it's a little smaller than Shreveport, it's got that rural area around it.
And you mentioned that you would prefer the in-house approach within the parish and terminate the contract approach with the city's Metropolitan Planning Commission. Is there support on the commission for that?
Not at this time, no.
So
No, I think that the majority feels that using the MPC is the best avenue, but that's kind of where we are right now.
Okay. What is your assessment of the split if a vote were to be held tomorrow?
Oh. 8-4 maybe, to keep it with the MPC. And that might be pushing that. It might be 10-2.
Okay, all right. Well, I would, while you're still present, I would invite the experience of the other members of the committee. I can tell you that the people who have been blowing up my phone and chewing on this ear, that I hear from where I live, are very much of the same mind that you are, and would like it to be 12-0 to come out from under the Metropolitan Planning Commission. Is anyone else having a different experience? Let me, maybe to go quicker. Anybody want to raise their hand and say that I've had a different experience?
I want to say something else once you finish that question. I would like to make a point once you gotten your answer to your question.
Going around the dais here, is anybody else hearing different things from your friends and neighbors? Mr. Crackman?
Always got something to say.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's why we're appointed.
I know in the district that I'm in, District 2, it's Lyndon Johnson's district, which encompasses all the way from Martin Luther King Drive all the way to Blanchard, just about. So it's a very diverse situation, and I'm right in the middle. What I'm getting is kind of a catch-22 because, well, one, I think, well, I'm pretty sure Ms. Frazier was going to touch on that as far as hiring the NPC back and talking about dual position holding and stuff like that. I don't know what the complications of that is. However, I do know that a lot of the people that I'm around and have talked to, they, at the same time, they would like to have a board of their peers from the unincorporated area. But at the same time, because my district is incredibly conservative, they don't want to make government bigger. So
I hear you.
it's a catch-22. I'm getting kind of the end of both.
Well, I think that brings us back to keeping it the same in that district, that the Wild West isn't all that wild. Judge Young.
To more specifically, I think, I don't think they'd mind government being bigger if they didn't have to pay for it. And so the commission would have to find out a way to acquire the same functions for at least not more than what they're paying the NPC to do it for them. And that might be impossible.
I didn't hear all of it, so.
That might be impossible to do for the commission to have in-house perform the same functions that they now pay the NPC to do for them.
Right.
If it's not able to do, then I doubt you're gonna get much support in any area of the parish.
Right.
For more taxes, for example, a tax for a Caddo NPC.
All right, Ms. Frazier.
And I just wanted to make the point and make sure that it's understood that there's a difference between the MPC as a board and the MPC staff, which basically just goes out and carry out the laws, whatever you guys will recommend putting on the books and whatever the commission adopts. When Commissioner Hopkins is talking about whether to keep that function in-house or whether to pay the MPC, he's speaking of paying the MPC staff for the enforcement, not to have the board come in and make decisions as they do now. So if you do have someone who's calling you who doesn't understand that, it's basically a staffing issue. It's not an MPC coming in and being paid to make the decisions that everybody's already so unhappy.
All right. Okay, very good point.
I appreciate that.
All right, and do I understand that this 5-person planning board has already been approved?
Yes, sir.
But not populated?
That's correct.
So we have spaces but not faces.
That's
at
correct.
This point. And is that planning board also going to be a zoning board, or is it just for the purpose of planning?
Oh, it'll be the zoning board. It will be the board that will meet in the cases. So let's say basically this is how it would work, the way it currently, in January, someone that's out in the current MPC area will bring their application to MPC. It's out in the parish, but they'll come to the MPC office. They'll go through it. They'll go do all the checking they need to do and all the investigation, whatever's involved. Then they will call the Caddo Planning and Zoning Board, is what I call it. They will meet and they will rule on whether to rezone or whatever needs to be done based on the UDC at this time, because we haven't changed anything yet. We're still under the UDC until we change something. So based on the UDC regulations, that board will meet. They'll decide whatever they're going to decide, to rezone, not to rezone. Then that comes to the commission to ratify.
Okay.
So, and that's what I definitely like about it, because instead of having 6 people that we know really don't have a dog in that fight, we've got 5 people coming from the area making a decision first whether to, yeah, it fits, it needs to be rezoned, let's send it to the commission for final ratification.
And these individuals would be required to reside in the unincorporated areas of the parish that
Correct.
they're going to be deciding on.
That's in the ordinance now. They have to be domiciled inside the unincorporated area.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll invite Mr. Brown to visit with you as his commissioner to see if that answers the mail on some of his concerns. All right. Anything else for Commissioner Hopkins? Sir, thank you so much for coming and enlightening us with your vision for this. I feel much better informed right now than I did a half hour ago.
Good. I'm just wondering, would you come to our next commission meeting and do the opening the same way so everybody would understand how a meeting ought to run? Thank you.
A little business from my former job. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Looking at the next item on the agenda. Discussion of technical requirements, open meeting law compliance, ethics law compliance, and public records law compliance. Those 3 different areas, I asked the parish attorney's office and the clerk of the commission to give us a little rundown on those things. I am very used to the similar provisions at the federal level. I'm somewhat of a newcomer in state and local government, but these can be complex and convoluted little rules, and I've seen a lot of people stub their toe and end up with an email that they thought was completely private end up on the front page of the Washington Post. Oops. And so it's probably a good idea that we understand these rules. So, clerk of the commission, parish attorney, I'd like to turn it over to you to address those.
Thank you so much. I think I'll start out and then turn it over to Donna for some additional comments. I want to first thank you for asking. You know, this is something that everybody doesn't always think about when they start getting going on a project like this. And it is good to know that you have all your ducks in a row at the beginning to make sure you don't make an accidental misstep that might compromise the quality of your work. So first of all, I just want to mention about the open meetings law. You've got an attachment in your packet that summarizes some of the more relevant parts of the open meetings law. Some of them really aren't that relevant to you, but they are important and need to be mentioned. The primary things to remember is that if you have a meeting that constitutes a quorum, if you have a meeting where business is being discussed, if you have a meeting where there are decisions that are going to be made by the body, votes that are going to be taken, you need to post that meeting 24 hours in advance, at least. And that needs to be posted on the building where the meeting's going to occur, as well as typically, in this case, it would also be posted on our website at the parish. I'm happy to post those for you, but the other side to that is, given the nature of your work, you may want to have a couple of people that join up in a certain part of the parish and a couple of people that join up you may want to have some different people in Keithville than you have in North Caddo, and 2 or 3 people that get together to do kind of a listening session. You're still going to want to obviously to make sure that that's successful, you're going to want to promote that and do noticing on it, but you don't necessarily have to worry about that being, following the strict rules of the open meetings law. It's a gathering, it's a hearing, it's a listening session, but it's not necessarily a meeting of the public body. The public body would constitute this group, and you would need a quorum for that to be the case. Also, there are exceptions to the open meetings law. I don't think many of them are going to apply to the type of business that y'all are going to be taking on, so I'll kind of breeze past those. Again, the notice of meetings is I put some detail in there about how it's to be done. I don't think you should have any problem with it. If you have a regularly scheduled meeting, you can post them early in terms of like on a calendar or something like that. But you guys having not had your meeting dates set by ordinance, y'all are just setting your meeting by internal decision. You're not required to post a year's worth of meetings in advance or anything. So please do let me know within 24 hours before, a little before within 24 hours, maybe 26 hours or more, and we can get it posted and in compliance. So the next item that I've got in here, and I'm sorry if I might be a little out of order on the agenda, but pretty close. I wanted to make sure that y'all understood the documenting requirements. So first of all, public records include any email where any document where you are addressing the business of this body. So that's going to include your email, text messages. It's going to include memos, letters, those type of things. Will be subject to a public records request. And a public records request, citizens have the right to request information and that they be given those documents. Donna can go into the kind of the specifics about what can or cannot be released, but suffice it to say there are some protections of sensitive information and that kind of thing. But generally, don't write it down or, text it or email it if you don't want it to be a part of the public record at some point, because it is all technically publicly accessible. And then in terms of documenting the meetings for public review, again, this body, because of the nature of it, you're all private citizens. And so because you're all private citizens appointed to a advisory body, there's not a strict requirement that you post minutes. Now, again, for your goals, you may want to post minutes, but they can be in the way that you think that your audience or you think that you want to engage people. They don't have to necessarily be in the same strict format as traditional minutes. So I do think that's important to note. That's from Louisiana Revised Statutes 4217D. That's an exemption that applies to a body like this body. And again, I've got that highlighted on a little handout for you there. Another couple of items, just real quickly, print it out, because the nature of this work, again, it's good to know your ethics and be on top of ethics. Ethics and morality aren't always the exact same thing. Ethics laws can seem a little clunky at times, but it's best to know what they are ahead of time so you don't find yourself in any trouble. So I did provide everybody with a copy of the ethics overview. And then this here that you would find in your packet is a printout of the, there's a web page where you can go and register with the Louisiana Ethics, and you can take an instructional course there. It's really easy to do online, and it is helpful, particularly, if you haven't had that kind of training before. It's a helpful online video. It doesn't take too much time, so that would be great to do that. I do believe you are technically required to do that. I'm not sure that there is, there could be some leeway in that interpretation, but better be safe than sorry and just take the ethics training.
Again, from my experience at the federal level, there's a distinction that is made between a purely advisory body and a body that has some independent authority on its own.
You're correct,
And,
yes.
and we are purely advisory, not even to the entire Caddo Commission, but to the subcommittee of the Caddo Commission on Planning.
Correct.
So are we required to do ethics filing and ethics training, parish attorney, or?
You are not required to do ethics filing as far as financial reporting is concerned. I would recommend that you do the ethics training simply because there are going to be some of the ethics laws that are applicable, even though you are advisory and not paid, as far as what types of transactions you could participate in that involve the parish or involve commissioners or things of that nature. And so it takes about 45 minutes to an hour, but it will help you go through the rules in your handout to make sure that you understand those. So I would recommend that you do that, because that's just kind of the easiest way to get a feel for a way to avoid traps. And if you do have questions, please contact us or the ethics board. They have duty attorneys that can answer some of your more simple questions. If there is a big question about some kind of transaction or business, we'd be happy to assist you in writing for an ethics opinion, because ultimately an opinion from the board is pretty much the only thing that guarantees CYA. So if you've got a question about that, we can help with that. But I would recommend taking the training just for that purpose.
And their website does have a lot of useful information. And you made a really good point too, and Donna, I think you touched on this as well. I should be specific that when you look there, you're going to see a section on disclosures. You guys, the nature of this committee is not subject to financial disclosures. Right. So, people who are in elected office have to disclose any sort of relationship that they may have financially, so that they can, kind of illustrate any sort of conflict of interest. You guys are not required that level of disclosure. So,
yeah, the annual SF 94 required of federal officials is like filling out a second tax return every year. Only you can't have your accountant do it for you. You've got to do it yourself. And it was painful. So thank you. I appreciate you guys pointing that out for us. All right. Anything else, Mr. Clerk?
I think that's all I had. Donna, did I hit the high points?
I do have a couple of things
Yes,
that I
ma'am.
wanted to hit. Going back to the open meetings law compliance, Jeff talked about minutes, and while you're not required to post them, I do suggest that you appoint a secretary or someone to take them, simply because when you start writing down your recommendations, you're going to need some notes to refer back to. And if everybody's memory is different, you need one set that you can all refer back to and say, this is an accurate recording of what happened. So you won't have to post those on the parish's website or anything, or publish them in the newspaper like the parish is required to do. But you do want to have them and keep them for your records.
And if I could add, thank you for pointing that out. And also, our office is happy to be the keeper of those records for historical reference. So once you finish your work, if you want to turn those records to the Caddo Commission office, we'll store those so that they can be looked back upon later down the road.
Well, and in fact, we did at our first organizational meeting elect a secretary, Ms. Tullis, and an assistant secretary, Ms. Bryce, down there, in case Ms. Tullis is not with us. For future meetings, I might suggest that we have an agenda item after public comment of a review and approval of those minutes from the previous meeting, so everybody can make sure that their memories are in sync with one another as we create that record.
The other thing I noticed, I don't know if you recall, at the beginning of the meeting, you have agenda additions
because it is a public meeting, if there is something to be added to the agenda, you all have to, everyone who's present from the board has to agree unanimously to add it. If it is not unanimous, it cannot be added to the agenda. It would have to come later on a different printed agenda. So be cognizant of that as well for agenda additions. You also have the public comment period, and you're required to have the public comment. But as Mr. Graves did earlier, he did limit the speaker to 3 minutes. So you can have reasonable rules and regulations governing those comments, because they can get out of hand. And as many of you know from the zoning discussions that we've had at the commission, this is a sensitive topic, so it can get out of hand. You definitely want to have your rules and regulations together with regard to speakers and be able to enforce those. Let me see, I think that is all that I had on.
They do actually also have the, I mean, it sort of explicitly says they have the authority to remove somebody who's not in compliance, so you.
Correct.
I don't know how you plan to do that, you know, like, I mean, I know I'm pretty intimidating, but, you know, we might.
We shudder in fear.
I know, right? But yeah, but you do have that right if somebody's being disrupted
Yes.
to have them to be removed from the open meeting. So
that-
don't think that you're not being open enough. If somebody is violating the rules, you can remove them.
That, indeed, Mr. Everson, is one of the reasons why I emphasized respect so much at the beginning. I have found that the more respect you give, the more respect you get. It's an amazing symmetry in human nature. And if we treat the public with respect, I have every expectation that they will treat us accordingly.
And one other thing that I did want to mention, as we are going through the pandemic, there are special rules for being able to meet online or electronically versus coming together in a public space. I don't know if we'll get to a point again where it's not safe to gather in a public space. Here's pretty good, especially around the dais, because you got the plexiglass and you are wearing your mask unless you're speaking. But should that be necessary, there are provisions for meeting electronically, and some of the topics may be somewhat limited on that. But I've got a kind of a checklist that I'll give you, Mr. Graves, because it depends on whether or not the chairperson of the committee or the task force will certify the agenda to allow the public meeting. So that'll kind of be your decision. But that is something that I will get to you. And
All
I
right,
think,
and please also give Mr. Thompson a copy of that as the
Okay.
vice chair.
okay,
Yeah.
I will do. The ethics law, I think we've gone
Mr.
over
Thompson.
pretty well. You have a handout. As I stated earlier, if you've got questions, feel free to call the parish attorney's office, or down to the ethics commission. They have duty attorneys as well. The last thing I wanted to talk about was public records. And as Mr. Everson stated, your meeting minutes are going to be public record. Any conversations that you have are going to, regarding this business, are going to be considered public records. And it's really tricky, because for people who work here at the parish, they have a parish email. You know, they can send an email to and from a common server, whereas all of you will have different email addresses. However, because it's something that you use for yourself personally, just because you send it over that personal medium doesn't exempt it from being a public record that's required to be turned over. So you really want to kind of watch your communication in making those records. And what I would ask is that if you get a public records request, please notify Mr. Bernstein or myself. The parish practice is to turn them over to us so that we can, number one, do a search for the record, and number two, document that the record has been produced. The records, if a public record is requested, it has to be produced within 72 hours unless there are some extenuating circumstances, but it takes up to 5 days to be able to actually, for someone actually to sue you for a public record. And sometimes these searches, particularly if it's voluminous, will take more than the 72 hours. And, you know, we don't have a choice about that. But, you know, we do the best we can to make sure that they are answered in a timely manner and that we document that the request has been answered. So if you get that kind of request, excuse me, please make sure that you let us know. As Mr. Everson stated, if it's not something that you want to make a record of, if it's kind of like an off-the-record discussion or an off-the-cuff discussion about something, you might just want to pick up the telephone and make a phone call as opposed to sending a text or an email. Something that where the public records and the open meetings can cross over. If there is a quorum of you present at any time, so that would be, I guess, 6 out of the 11, and you're discussing the business that the committee discusses or the task force discusses, that's considered an actual meeting that you would have had to give notice of. So, and this can happen sometimes on email and text trains, that if you're talking about it in a manner like how you're going to vote on something or something of that nature, it can actually turn into a meeting. So be careful about that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term walking quorum. Those are the kind of things that you want to avoid, where a quorum of you are kind of discussing how you're going to vote on something. So just be aware. I don't think you'll probably have that many issues because I'm not really sure that you'll have that many votes when it comes down to crafting what you're going to send to the commission. But should you get into a posture where you find yourself voting frequently, make sure that you are aware of those things. And I believe that is pretty much all I have. Do you all have any questions for me?
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Frazier? If I don't have any from the committee, I have a few, and
Sure.
And the first is I am familiar with other bodies and their custodians of public records, and it's typically an individual. For instance, for the city of Shreveport, it is the mayor individually is the custodian of public records, and the person that a public records request would have to be directed to start that 72-hour clock. Who is that person for the parish?
Well, technically, Mr. Graves, anybody that could have access to the records or anybody that is kind of in an administrative role will start that 72-hour clock because they generally know the person to get it to. So basically, we normally consider once it's gotten to us that the 72 hours starts, but while you may not be the official custodian, you know where your records are kept. And so you can't use the fact that the request was not sent to the custodian to defeat whether or not something is timely turned over.
So the clock starts when you get the request?
The clock starts when you get the request, yes.
Okay. Having heard that, I have requested of Mr. Everson that I be provided with a caddo.org email address for the conduct of my business as the chair of this committee. I don't know if anyone else feels that need, but from my past life where I dealt with FOIA requests, which is the Federal Freedom of Information Act, similar law at the federal level, I scrupulously conducted all of my public business on a DOD, Department of Defense email, and never conducted any business on a server in my bathroom, if you know what I mean. Okay, so I would suggest that that is the easiest way to comply with this. If the parish has everything that I do in this capacity, then I can just say, it's all transparent, and I want to be as transparent as I can possibly be in the conduct of my duties. Would anyone else like a Caddo.org email to carry out their duties, or are they okay doing it with their personal email? You'd like one, sir?
Sure.
Mr. Thomas?
I prefer public.
All right. Mr. Everson, if you can make a note of those two and me.
Who was, I saw you and Mr. Thomas, who was the other? Okay, great, thank you.
I have one.
Judge Young already has one. Is it a Caddo.org?
Yep.
Okay.
Still current?
Nobody stopped it yet.
Awesome.
All right, we'll just make sure it stays alive. All right. All right, that does make life easier.
And I was just going to say the easiest way is to avoid the most mundane of communications via email, whether it be a Caddo.org email or your personal email.
And one of the things that, just to mention, on the website, we have a comment form that where we invite citizens to leave comments on your website, on the Caddo website. And so we have set up an email address that anything that comes in through that goes to that email address and then is automatically forwarded to each of you. So I say that just so that you'll know that there is a document of anything that's forwarded to you. So we're keeping track of that in a separate email as well. So that's a good thing. So mainly, if you can just keep up with your responses, you don't have to keep up with the incoming that comes from the website.
All right. Okay. Ms. Frazier, anything else for us?
No.
Mr. Everson?
No.
All right, any questions for them before we move on to the next item? All right, the next item is planning for our next meeting and how we are going to proceed. And at this point, Mr. Crackman, you had mentioned that you wanted to extend an invitation to Representative McCormick.
Yes, sir.
To come visit with us on his Act 294 of 2020.
Yes, sir.
Let me just ask, rather than a formal motion, does anybody have an objection to this committee doing that, inviting Representative McCormick? If there is none, then I would be happy, as I did with Commissioner Hopkins, to extend that on behalf of the committee. And please, I welcome Mr. Crackman, if you'd also like to do that. If you guys are personal friends, please do that as well. I happen to know Representative McCormick and think very highly of him, and I think we would all benefit from having his vision communicated to us.
Okay.
All right. Any other thoughts about our next meeting and how we might want to conduct it, what we might want to inform ourselves of? Has everyone read the UDC? Can anybody tell me how many pages long it is?
312.
Yeah.
Second
It's-
that.
It's a whopper. It's a whopper.
Matrix too.
Yeah, has anyone read the Great Expectations Master Plan 2030?
Most of it.
Can anybody tell us how long that is?
2,000 and something odd pages.
That's right. An even bigger whopper. These things are almost impossible to get your mind around. And it's one of the reasons why I think my ears have been chewed on so much, because people just don't desire to be governed by that sort of thing. Even Moses came down the mountain with only 10 commandments, not 10,000. So, yeah, please inform yourselves of that. I don't think we want to have a reading of the thousands of pages of the Master Plan 2030 or even the 300 of the UDC, but I would commend to everyone to become familiar with those things so that at least we know what it is we're dealing with. All right. right, any other thoughts about our next meeting? I note from looking at the calendar that what we set aside as a recurrent meeting date, that being the third Tuesday of the month, falls on September 21st, next month. Does that remain a good date for all the members present? Anybody have difficulty with that? Mr. Everson, with my apologies, we still want to make it available to the public, so is 6 p.m. still a good time for everyone? All right.
Just
and
as
Mr.
a-
Everson, is that practical for you to support that on that date?
Just as a side note, I do want to let y'all know that so the Historic Preservation Commission, which is a City of Shreveport body, they meet in this room at 4 p.m. on that day. So, you know, I mean, it would be the same as today. They met here today. There's just always the chance that they might run late, but I don't think it's a likely chance, so it should be fine.
All right. Well, that's good to know that we might have to run them out of here. All right. Okay. Okay. Well, is there any other business then to come before the committee at this meeting? Going once, going twice, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Second. All right. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.